In this section of the course, I'm going to describe some practical tasks that most developers need to know how to do, including reading and writing files and communicating over the internet. I'll start with File I/O. The Java class library in Java 8 implements two completely separate File I/O systems: the original system that was delivered with the original version of Java back in 1995 and has evolved somewhat since then, and a completely new version that was delivered with Java 7. In this demonstration, I'll talk about techniques that are available in all versions of Java, including Android's implementation, because the newer libraries aren't available in all versions of Java, including Android's. I'm working in a project named Copy File, and this project, in addition to the source files, has a files folder, and there's a file there called loremipsum.txt. I'm going to demonstrate the Java code you'd need to make a copy of this file. Now, you can use any file you want, including a file that might be much longer, but I'll use this short file just to make things go very quickly. I'm starting in an empty main method. And first, I'll declare a couple of strings, one pointing to the existing file and one pointing to the name and location of a file that I want to create. I'll declare a string, and I'll name it source file. And I'll set its value to files/ and then the name of the file, loremipsum.txt. Make sure that you spell the name of this file correctly. Also notice that I'm using a / even though I'm working on Windows. In Java, the / is used as the directory separator on all operating systems. Then I'll declare another string, and I'll name this one target file. And I'll place the file in the same directory, the file subdirectory of this project, but I'll name it target.txt. Next, I'm ready to create a few classes that I'll need. I'm going to be using 3 classes from the Java class library, named FileReader, BufferedReader, and FileWriter. I'll start with the try-catch block. And right after the try keyword, I'll add a pair of parentheses, and this is where I'll declare these objects. I'm using a syntax style known as try with resources. Whenever you declare objects within the parentheses after the try keyword, that means that these objects implement a method named close, or to be more accurate, they implement an interface named autoclosable. All of these objects need to be closed before you finish what you're up to. By instantiating the objects here, I'll allow the Java runtime to call the close methods for me. Now, within those parentheses, I'll create an instance of the class FileReader from the java.io package. When I select the class, an import for that class is added. And I'll name it freader for FileReader. And I'll instantiate it by calling the constructor method, and I'll pass in the name of the file. Notice you can pass in a string or an instance of a class named file, but that would be an intermediate step that I don't need. I'll pass in source file, and that's the file I'm going to be reading. Now, if I were only creating one object, I wouldn't need the semicolon here, but I am going to create more than one closable object. So I'll add the semicolon, and then on the next line, I'll create an instance of a class named BufferedReader. The BufferedReader class has a method named readLine that'll make it very easy for me to read the file one line at a time. I'll name this one bReader, and I'll instantiate it with new, BufferedReader, and I'll pass my FileReader object into it. Finally, I'll create a FileWriter class, and this class will be used to create the target file. I'll instantiate it with new, FileWriter, and I'll pass in target file. Before I continue with the rest of the code, I'll come down here to the end of the try section, and I'll add a catch block. I'll be very general in the exception handling. I'll just look for an exception object that I'll name E. Notice when I add the catch block, all of the error indicators go away on my declaration of the closable objects. So now I'm ready to actually do the work of reading and writing the file. Here's the logic I'll use. I'll create a while block and I'll set my condition to true. So that means I'm creating an infinite loop, and I'll need to explicitly break out of the infinite loop whenever I want to. Within the loop, I'll read one line using the BufferedReader. I'll create a string, I'll name it line, and I'll get its value with breader.readLine. If readLine successfully finds text, it'll return that value as a string. Otherwise, it'll return null. So now I'll do a bit of conditional code to find out whether I got a string I can work with. My condition will be line matches the value of null. And if it is null, I'll break out of my while loop by calling the break keyword. But then in the else block, I'll take that string that I read and I'll write it to the target file with writer.write, and then I'll pass in the line, and I'll also pass in a line feed. When you call readLine, you're only getting the text of the line itself. The line feed that separates the lines is ignored, so I need to put it back into my final file. Within my catch block, I'll just add some code to print the stack trace with e.printStackTrace. I'm not expecting any exceptions, but if I do get one, I'll get some help understanding what it is. So, let's read through the code one more time. I'm using the try with resources syntax that was introduced in Java 7, and I'm creating 3 closable objects, a file reader, a buffered reader, and a file writer. Then, I'm doing an infinite loop and reading one string at a time. If I get to the end of the file, I'll get a null value back and I'll break out of the loop. Otherwise, I'll write that line to my target file. At the end of the loop, I'll just add a little bit of output and I'll say file copied. And I'm ready to test the code. I'll run the application and I get the message file copied, but more importantly, I see my target file has been created in the files subdirectory. And I'll open it and confirm that it looks exactly like my original file. So again, this bit of code will work in pretty much all versions of Java, with the exception of try with resources. The try with resources syntax was added in a later version of Java. If you're working in Android, you might not be able to use it, depending on which version of Android you're coding for. And if you're working with an older version of Java, you won't be able to use it either. So instead, you would instantiate these objects within the try block and then close them explicitly by calling their close methods before you finish executing your code.